Last on Everdark, Julian is presented with the crimes of the people to be sacrificed to bring Heath back. Only if Julian approves the sacrifices going forward will Daemon return Heath. Julian agrees, as he realizes that this is the right move, both morally and politically, for Daemon. Christian and Balthazar join them for the ceremony to bring the dead back to life. Everdark, Episode 41, Set Point. The candles were lit and placed on every available surface, creating a golden glow in the white marble rooms. Elena and Ridley were already seated on the cold ground of the innermost chamber with the last open sarcophagus at their backs. A bit of Heath's hair, a photograph of the young vampire, and a very sharp knife was sitting in a white stone bowl. Elena gripped her remaining fledgling's hand so hard that her knuckles were white with the strain, but Ridley did not object. She stared at Heath's photograph in the bowl as if trying to memorize his face. Sophia had arranged the human sacrifices to surround Elena, Ridley, the bowl, and the place he would sit in a circle. There were no expressions on their faces. Their eyes were empty. Daemon knew that if he touched their minds, he would find terror there. These 6 predators were aware that their time had come to an end, and they would have done anything to survive, but there was no way out. Beyond the 2 circles, Balthazar, Arceus, and Christian stood in the nearest corner. Christian was pale, and his head occasionally twitched as if hearing something. But then Balthazar would touch his hand, and Christian would go still again. His Eiros was taking very good care of his very special fledgling. The rest of House Ravenscroft filled every available last space in the catacombs. They perched on sarcophagi. They crammed in amongst the statuary. They stood on the stairs. There were more that could not get into the 3 stone rooms that peered over shoulders desperately at the top of the stairs. Now that Daemon's existence was not a secret, they were filming him, sending his image on their phones to one another so all could see, even if they were not in the room. But the only person in that room he cared about at that moment was in his arms. Julian, his fledgling. His sensitive fledgling didn't want even these loathsome people to die. Daemon's lips lingered on Julian's temple. He could feel the beat of his fledgling's heart through the thin skin there. He closed his eyes and concentrated on the sound and vibration of it. Life, eternal life, was Julian's now. Bringing back the dead was never pleasant for him. Death itself was alien to who and what he was. It felt like reaching into raw sewage and fishing around for a treat. The whole experience was foul. So he focused on Julian instead, until he had to do otherwise. Julian's reaction to the idea of sacrificing 6 people was also alien to him. While he relished life in all its forms, it was sometimes hard to remember that these faint, flickering lights of mortals were important, especially when they treated the lives of others so casually. But human blood nurtured their everlasting life. Human blood was necessary. So to cull these 6 people from the herd they were attacking and killing the rest felt right to him. It made the act he was about to do seem more sacred. He knew that it soothed his fledgling's conscience, if nothing else. He opened his eyes and drew back so that he could gaze down upon Julian's beautiful face. His fledgling's eyelids also fluttered open. There was almost a dazed expression in those purple eyes, so like and unlike his own. But they marked Julian as his as much as the infinity symbol on Julian's right wrist did. He found himself running his thumb over that mark. Julian smiled at him.
"Whenever you touch me, I feel a little drunk,"
Julian admitted.
"In the best way, but it's weird."
"I am your master. My very presence should please you. Your body and soul respond to me, and only me," Daemon told him, his voice dipping at the end. Julian let out a soft huff of breath.
"You say it so casually, like belonging to you is normal."
"Do you not feel it is so?" Daemon arched one eyebrow. Julian clearly considered this. Finally, his gaze sharpened on Daemon's face.
I do, and that sort of scares me.
Why? He cupped Julian's cheek. You are mine, and I treasure you.
I'm not a treasure, Daemon. I'm a person. I belong to myself.
Julian lifted his chin proudly. Julian's desire to claim ownership of himself did not displease Daemon. Not at all. It just showed how strong his fledgling was, that he could resist Daemon's words and his own true nature. Daemon did not think it was just the age that he had awakened into, or even this strange country ruled by the masses that Julian was born into that accounted for Julian's self-mastery. Julian was a warrior, and saw himself as his own agent, and as an agent for others he deemed worthy. Daemon respected this. But he is still mine. His fingers slid along the soft skin of Julian's cheek, relishing the bristle of stubble along the powerful jaw. Julian's eyelids fluttered almost shut, but he forced them open and gave Daemon a hard look.
You're still thinking that I'm yours, aren't you?
Julian asked sternly. You are, Daemon said simply, because it was a simple fact in his mind. Julian's stern facade cracked as he let out a soft huff of laughter.
You are incorrigible. You know that?
Another caress of that lovely jaw as he answered. At times.
I think they're waiting for you to get started.
Julian pointed out, resisting the pleasure of his touch. He tilted his head towards the two circles.
You did say it was time to begin.
Yes, he had. And it would begin when he was ready. Perhaps he was avoiding the sewage fishing that was raising the dead, but also he worried for Julian still. His fledgling was not as at peace with the sacrificing as he'd hoped. Do you wish to stay for this? You do not need to if you do not wish to, Daemon said.
I should be here. I would feel like a coward if I hid upstairs and just waited for it to be done.
Julian admitted. You are not a coward, Daemon assured him. Death is not for everyone. Most abhor the Kali gift because it brings death into our immortal lives again.
I feel I have to see this through. Sophia went to a lot of trouble to find these 6, just for me. So I have to be here.
Julian said, his eyes flitting over to the 6 humans that were to be sacrificed. Daemon regarded his fledgling for long moments. He thought about ordering Julian to go upstairs, but his strong-willed fledgling would not appreciate such a command. Julian would feel that it impacted upon his autonomy. Daemon was just beginning to understand this concept as he learned Julian's mind. He supposed that he would resent another sending him away, even if that person had more experience of existence and greater wisdom than he did. Because, at any point in time, one felt that they knew what was best for themselves. This was one of those moments. It was also a set point. He could feel it in the very fabric of time. Seer had been the one to name these moments. They were like knots on the string of time, knots that could not be undone without great destruction. Because of this difficulty, she believed that to undo them was to go against fate. For an immortal to believe in something greater than herself was rare. But Seer said that she was certain, even though she had never glimpsed them, that there was something more, something greater than themselves that was creating these set points. Set points were always momentous. So bringing Heath back was meant to happen. Other things might be meant to happen too. He could not see the future, though. He had tried, but that gift was closed off to him. That was likely because he was such a large part of what was to happen. But this blindness and potential momentousness made him want Julian to be with someone that he trusted. During a set point, things could move quickly and in unexpected ways. His gaze automatically moved to Arceus. He found himself trusting this priest more and more. Daemon gestured for the vampire confessor to come over. Arceus did so with alacrity. He pressed his hands together as if in prayer in front of his chest and bowed his head.
Yes, my king?
Arceus asked. Julian wishes to remain for the ceremony. I am trusting you with his care, Daemon said with all solemn formality. Julian stirred. He gave Daemon a quirked smile.
I was going to stand by Arceus, Balthazar, and Christian over in the corner there anyways. You don't have to make Arceus my babysitter.
I think you are quite capable of getting into trouble, even in the corner, Daemon told him, trying to lighten the mood. Besides, I will be able to concentrate far better knowing that you are being taken care of. Do this to humor me, if not for yourself. Julian rolled his eyes, but he nodded. He turned to Arceus and said,
Okay, guard me well, Arceus.
Arceus chuckled, but his eyes were serious as they flickered towards Daemon.
I will. Upon my immortal soul, I will.
His promise had Daemon relaxing. He released his fledgling into the other's care. Arceus put an arm around Julian's shoulders and led him over to the corner, where the other two were. Immediately, the two best friends put their heads together and started to speak, whispering low. Julian was checking in to see if Christian was all right. Christian assured him he was, but in a rushed manner, which told both of them that he wasn't. But then Christian started to talk about how everything was set up in the room and how it reminded him of certain rituals he read about in certain of the Harrow's books. Daemon allowed himself to let that conversation thread go. It was time to bring Heath back. Daemon unbuttoned his black suit coat and allowed it to slither down his arms. He caught it with the fingers of his right hand.
I'll hold it for you,
William offered almost shyly. Daemon inclined his head in thanks and handed it to William. The child vampire held his coat as if it were a sacred object. He then undid the cufflinks and slipped those into his pocket, before rolling up the sleeves of his shirt to his elbows. Even though he was not literally going to be reaching into sewage, he wanted his arms as free as possible. He drew in a deep breath and then walked over to Elena and Ridley. He gracefully lowered himself into a cross-legged position opposite them. The bowl was between him and them. Elena's silver eyes fixed upon him with an almost feverish desire for her fledgling to come back. Ridley looked nervous but excited. He gave her a smile, which she returned. I know that the two of you have been thinking about Heath. I need you to dig deeper. Remember his scent. Remember the sound of his voice. Remember what it felt like to feel his touch. Remember the very core of him. He urged them. Close your eyes if it helps. Picture him with everything you have. The two women nodded, and both their eyelids closed. There was a hushed silence in the room. The earlier murmurings were now gone. Daemon reached out and grasped their hands in his. Elena's hands were clammy and cold. Ridley's felt hot, as if she'd been gripping a mug of warm tea. He looked into their minds, and both of them were thinking of Heath. Ridley was remembering the night when he was first turned. She had sat at the bottom of the bed where Elena and Heath lay upon it intertwined. Elena had pillowed Heath's head against her breast, stroking his dark hair, while Ridley had held onto his ankle, anchoring him. Ridley had been so happy to have a little brother. Her own family had been broken apart when she was only a little girl, and for the first time, she had felt like everything was coming together. Tears squeezed out of her eyes as she remembered their first hunt together. She remembered how he'd held her when she'd realized that her last ties to her first life had to be cut. A girlfriend, who was now in her 30s, had finally noticed that Ridley hadn't aged and was really questioning it. Heath had made her believe that her best friendships were to come. Let the past be the past, Ridley. Let it die. Live in the present. With me, he'd said. With Elena and House Ravenscroft. Balthazar will grow our house. He'll even get us back into the Everdark, I think. Don't despair. The best is still to come. She'd wiped away her tears and nodded before resting her head on his shoulder. They'd stayed that way until the horizon lightened, and then slept in the darkness of her bedroom, warm, safe, loved, together.
Did you know that I give away at least 2 books every month? On Amazon, I've published several gay romance series, including more vampire romance, but that's not Everdark related. On Amazon, I can make books free for 5 days every quarter, so I make sure to schedule at least 2 of them per month. If you want to know when the next free book is, Join my old-fashioned mailing list found on my shop site. The link is in the notes.
Elena, too, was remembering the first time she'd met Heath. He'd been seated in a coffee shop, dressed all in black, with even blacker thoughts. He held a cup of untouched cold coffee between his hands, staring into the dark depths as if they held answers. She drifted over to him.
"May I join you?"
She asked, her hand on the back of the chair opposite his. He looked up at her and his eyes were red with grief. "You might not want to."
"Why not?"
"Because the police are going to come," he said, and his hands convulsively tightened on the coffee cup. Her eyebrows rose. If there was anyone less likely to be criminal than this young man, she couldn't imagine it. She pulled back the chair and sat down.
"Now that sounds like a story. Why would the police be after you?"
His mouth opened and shut convulsively. He wondered why he was talking to this strange woman. She knew this, but she used a touch of the Iros gift to put him at ease. She could tell that talking about whatever this was that was digging into his very soul would help him. And there was something about him, something in the soft brown of his eyes and the almost prettiness of his face that made her want to mother him. The coffee sloshed in the cup as a shudder went through him. He had decided to tell her. Well, the Iros gift had helped. I killed someone," he whispered.
"I admit that this surprises me. You don't look like a killer. But then,
She shrugged and gave a self-conscious smile.
few do."
"I killed my mother," he gasped out. That had her stiffening. It would be ironic that this lost little boy attitude had drawn her mothering instincts when he was, in actuality, a mother-killer. Her eyes hooded as she regarded him. Sometimes there were very good reasons to kill a parent or parental figure. Roan, Tithe, had needed killing. Even now she sometimes mourned him, missing him, or rather, missing what he should have been to all of them, but had not been. She felt these things despite knowing that Roan was a monster, so she would not rule out this young man as food or more yet.
"Why did you kill her?"
She asked, her voice devoid of judgment. His shoulders hunched. "Because she was suffering,"
"She was dying."
Elena guessed. His head jerked once in assent. "Breast and ovarian cancer. It was eating her alive. I watched it strip the flesh from her bones." She winced. Disease in her time had taken people young and quick. In some ways, modern medicine had only accomplished extending suffering, but not actually curing the underlying disease, and there was no right to die in this state. She didn't want to go on. She sometimes screamed because she was in so much pain. His voice broke, and he rubbed his face with his hands. "She asked my father to help her, but he wouldn't." The betrayal in his voice was hard to miss. He was never religious in his entire life, in anything else, but when it counted for him to do what was right, he claimed it was a sin.
"So she asked you, and you said yes?"
The last was not a question, but confirmation. He nodded in that jerky, wretched way. "She hid pain meds. It took us so long to get enough of them." He sniffed. Tears were falling. "Then I got her out of the hospital, and we went to our summer home. She loved it there. She wanted to see the lake one last time. It was frozen, but she still loved it. We stayed there all day. She was so happy, even though I could tell her pain was so bad. Then I helped her take the pills. I told her. I held her hand as she went away." Elena let the silence land for a moment before she reached across and touched his hands that still held the coffee cup in a death grip.
"You aren't a murderer. You're a savior."
His eyes met hers. "My father didn't think so. He found us. When he saw that she was gone, he called the police. I fled, but they'll find me." In fact, Elena had spotted a police cruiser parking just down the block. She gripped Heath's hand harder. Most vampires took a long time to choose their fledglings, but just like how it had been with Ridley, She knew that Heath was meant to be hers. 2 police officers were walking purposefully down the sidewalk. Heath saw them through the plate glass windows and stiffened.
Heath.
She said his name, knowing it from his mind, though he had not yet told her it. His eyes snapped to hers in surprise and a little fear. She used her Iros gift to calm him.
You have a choice to make, and I'm afraid it must be done quickly. You can go back to your old life and potentially face a prison term that will devour your youth and stain your life afterwards. Or you can come with me and start something completely new.
How? That could have been the beginning of many questions. How do you know my name? How do you know that is where my life will lead? How can you offer me something else? You don't even know me.
Your act of bravery and compassion should be honored, not punished.
She told him.
I can make it so. Will you come with me?
Heath hadn't hesitated. He'd known as soon as he'd given his mother the pills that there was no going back. He hadn't expected there to be anything other than prison ahead of him. So this was something new, something unexpected, something like hope. He nodded. There was a chiming sound as the bell above the coffee shop's door was shaken when the police officers pushed the door open. They were beelining it for Heath. His nostrils flared, and a sheen of sweat covered his face. "Are you?" the first officer began.
He's not who you're looking for,
Elena said smoothly. The officer's face went slack for a moment, but then he blinked and said to his partner, "He's not who we're looking for." "Right, he's not," the other officer said. The 2 of them turned around and headed out of the coffee shop. Heath watched them go with a dazed look on his handsome face. "How did you do that?" he stammered out. She smiled.
I'll teach you how and so much more. Come with me.
She rose and offered him her hand. He took it, and the 2 of them walked out into the night. This memory brought Heath alive again in Daemon's mind. He sensed that same spirit in Nightfallen. Heath lingered by his tomb along with Selene. She raged while he mourned. He had lost the most precious gift he had been given, a second chance. He regretted everything he had done. Why had he not questioned Selene? Why had he gone against Balthazar's orders? He had trusted Selene, and now he knew that she was a traitor, and he was too, no matter what his intentions had been. Daemon sent everything he found out from Elena, Ridley, and Heath to Julian. His fledgling's heart lurched.
Bring him back, Daemon. He didn't deserve what happened to him.
Julian said. "I think you like him already," Daemon said.
Perhaps you're right.
Julian smiled. Daemon opened the spiritual door between Nightfallen and House Ravenscroft, and he called Heath's name. The young vampire's spirit turned towards his voice. Heath appeared as a faint mist that became more solid as it approached the door. "Come through, Heath. Your mistress and sister call you," Daemon whispered. The mist drifted closer and stopped right on the edge of the door. Heath could see Elena and Ridley through the door, but he hesitated. He betrayed Balthazar by going into Nightfallen and threatening Christian and Julian. When he saw both boys standing by Balthazar, he pulled back. Daemon reached for him. "Come through, Heath. Your house calls you," Daemon whispered. But that just made Heath think about how he had failed. As much as he wanted to stay in this life, he feared the consequences of his actions. He feared the consequences of his actions. He feared he did not belong any longer. "Come through, Heath. Your king calls you," Daemon whispered. The mist drew nearer again, shocked by the revelation of who he was. "You must come through. I command it," Daemon whispered. He touched the mist. This was the fishing and sewage part. To touch the spirit should have been to touch life. But the spirit was not meant to remain without a body on this plane, so death touched it, pulled it, tainted it, and touching it was touching death. Heath let out a sigh and passed through the spiritual doors and into the catacombs. Daemon heard a rush of breath from the vampires in that room. Heath now hovered above the bowl. They could see him.
Heath!
Elena sobbed softly.
Brother!
Ridley gasped. Daemon grasped the knife from the bowl and drew it along Elena's palm. She hissed with the pain. A bright red gush of blood spattered into the bowl. Ridley offered her hand before he had to ask. Another cut, from fingers to wrist, poured more crimson into the bowl. It covered Heath's picture and his hair. A red mist flowed up from the bowl to the floating blue-white mist that was Heath. The red and blue mixed, and instead of an undefined column of ghostly mist, there was an outline of Heath as he once had been. This was the beginning of the rebirth. He fluidly stood up from the ground and went over to the nearest human sacrifice. He met Julian's eyes. His fledgling's eyes were wide, lips parted slightly and breathing elevated. He was awed and afraid. Daemon gripped the hair of the sacrifice. It was the trucker who raped the boys. "You should look away, my fledgling," Daemon said.
You know I can't.
Julian responded softly. "You are not a coward. You do not need to bear witness to this," Daemon assured him.
You
can change your mind at any time," Daemon told him. Julian's hands fisted at his sides, but he did not look away. Daemon took the blade and drew it across the rapist's throat. There was a gurgling sound, but the blood did not flow down the throat and chest. Instead, it streamed into the air towards Heath. When the blood reached Heath, veins and arteries started to move the blood throughout the very nascent beginnings of a body. Daemon kept the rapist's body upright as it drained. He pulled the blood out of every single cell. The flesh turned paler and paler until it was white, then grey. Then it dried out into a husk. It turned into dust and drifted past his face. He looked over at Julian through the haze of the rapist's ashes. A single tear tracked down Julian's cheek, but he had not looked away. The taint of death from Heath had lessened. His skin was not chilled from it so much anymore. He held the blade at throat height as he walked the outer circle of the sacrifices. The blade cut through their skin like butter on a hot day. Their bodies went rigid as their blood surged towards Heath's gaining form. It was a torrent of crimson running through the air. He fed his magic into the blood, turning it slightly golden.
He's coming back. Oh God, I can touch him.
Elena breathed. She had reached out and touched the forming leg.
He's coming back, Ridley. We're gonna have him back.
And that was when Daemon felt the set point shiver. Something was going to happen. Something momentous. Something bad. His first thought was to go to Julian, but he had to know where the danger was coming from. Daemon's gaze flickered around the room. All of the sacrifices were drained. Ash, like grey snow, filled the catacombs. Christian allowed some of the pieces to land on his right palm. He rubbed a finger over the soft, fine material that smeared over his skin. Heath's body was fully formed. There was a gasp as he took his first breath. Heath's eyes were huge. He focused on Elena. She stumbled to her feet and reached for his still floating form. He opened his lips to say his mistress's name, but then those silver eyes went blank.
What's happened? Heath? Heath! Help him, King Daemon!
Elena screamed. Daemon felt Heath's soul being yanked from his body. Another spiritual portal had opened. Heath's spirit was through it before he had time to grasp the young vampire. But just before it closed, he felt a presence that he had not in so very long. "You should not have come back, Daemon," Callie's sexless voice informed him. "You should have slept forever." Join us next time for episode 42, Stronghold.
What else have I published on Amazon? Everything is gay romance, but the setting varies. I have a merman series, which is, you guessed it, merman romance. Cursed is an atmospheric 3-book retelling of Beauty and the Beast with were-tigers set in a secluded mansion with margaritas. Cinders and Ashes is a high fantasy series with fae, very loosely inspired by Cinderella, but with dragons, necromancers, secret loyalty. Okay, it's not Cinderella at all. The Bodyguard is an actual bodyguard romance, but there's also occult powers and reincarnation, plus flying snakes. I really can't do anything without some kind of magic or monsters involved. To me, it's not fun if it doesn't have that. If you want to see everything I've published on Amazon so far, look in the notes to find my Amazon author page. Most of the books are also in Kindle Unlimited. Thanks, guys.
The Everdark podcast by X Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Jay Thillis, Bruno Devant, Kelly Michaels, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Edited by Matthew Prince, continuity by Adrielle Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.